Welcome back, and we're lucky enough to be joined now by the legendary Bill Reed, the director of events here at the University of Portland, who is calling it quits after a 34-year career at UP. Bill Reed, you've been here for a long time. What are some emotions that are going through you right now? Excitement, sadness, both? What are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling there's a definite sadness going through me. It's very controllable, but it definitely is sadness, leaving a place that I've sort of become ingrained with, and they've become ingrained with me. But I leave back a legacy. I believe that's a positive legacy. I have some things in place that I think will carry on. So I feel very comfortable and confident that that's going to happen. But the other side of the coin is everybody keeps saying, Bill, this is your last this, last that, last this. But realize I have all these firsts that I'm going to be able to do. So I have a lot of firsts coming up that I'm looking forward to.
You've had a lot to do with that athletics through the years. I'm sure there's been some highlights, some good memories for you. Talk about some of those. I'm sure beating Oregon State back at Memorial Coliseum was one of them, and the two soccer national championships have to be up there for you.
Yeah, the Oregon State game with Ralph Miller as the coach and Jack Avina still in, I think, his third year. I could be wrong there, but right near his beginning of his career. And going to the Coliseum and beating them on neutral court in a sense, but really our home gym, was just a phenomenal victory. I mean, we literally rushed the court. This was hundreds and hundreds of people coming back for that game. So, and it's an exciting ball game. And then the two national championships, what can you say? Those were just book stories that I'll never ever forget. And spending time with those young ladies and watching them succeed was so exciting. And also the first one with Clive, his first and his last, but seeing Clive in that situation and watching him, the tears and the happiness and the hug from his lovely wife, it just really brought back chills for me every time I think of that.
Now, last Friday night, another maybe chills-inducing moment. You threw the first pitch
I did.
Joe Etzel Field before the Pilots game against San Diego.
Yeah.
Walk us through that. I'm sure it was an honor for you.
It was an honor for me.
And did Joe Etzel give you a few tips?
Right. So I'm looking at myself on Friday. This is Friday. All of a sudden, about 2 o'clock, I go, I better have some idea about what I'm doing here. So I phoned Joe up. I said, Joe, I'm going to throw the first pitch out. Would you mind at least warming me up a little bit? He said, Bill, I'd love to. So he came out early. We went to the bullpen. Matthew, his grandson, caught me. And Joe gave me a couple of things. He said, Joe's first thing, he said, Bill, everybody throws their first pitch, they all face with their two legs facing the catcher. You should turn sideways like a real pitcher and pitch. And then he said, it's around the house, just throw it like your big circle. And I did 10 or 12 with them, and I got it over about 6 times, 7 times.
50%, not bad.
Yeah, not bad. And then I walked out there, and Matthew said, Bill, just throw it like you threw it the 6 good times.
And you mentioned Joe Etzel. I'm sure he's one of the many people you've encountered here at UP that have meant a lot to you. We're going to go through some of those people. Let's start with Joe. Yeah. You actually go way back with Joe, don't you?
I go way back with Joe. In my sophomore year in college, I was pledging a fraternity, Sigma Tau Omega, and I needed to have a project. There was 3 of us in our pledge class. We needed to have a project that we could do as 3, but we had to stay on campus because none of us had cars. So somebody said, I think the lockers in Howard Hall downstairs needed some painting. So they all looked at me and said, well, Bill, why don't you go up and talk to Mr. Etzel? And I think they chose me because I was the tallest, and I would be tall with Joe. So, I went into his office, and Gail, his secretary, who was the secretary for many, many, many years, Gail Poff, she was sitting there, and I'm here to see Mr. Etzel, still Mr. Etzel, and walked into his office, and I said, I would like to, why? I said, well, I want to do this. I got to do this for this project. So what color? Well, we're going to paint it gray. Good. Like 4 words, maybe 5. That was it. Walked out, and I had a contract. I'm going, gee whiz, Then I meet him years and years later. We started working hand in hand. I had my office space in his building, the Child Center, and we became very good friends. We are still good friends. We became pretty close because we had to make some decisions regarding the building and how the building was functioning as an event space and also as an athletic space, and combining those two and making sure neither one of them was having too much time, in a sense, and taken away from the other. So it was a balancing act, and Joe was a great person to work with. He became Joe, never Mr. Etzel after that, and good man, very good man.
And you mentioned Clive Charles earlier. What are some of the things you remember about Clive?
Oh, Clive. Clive was just a good friend. We sat, I never forget this. We're in the dining room, the priest dining room over in the Commons. We're sitting at a table for lunch. Clive's at the table, myself, and probably Buzz, Pat Sweeney, maybe some others. And we're just talking about futures and so forth. And Clive had been there for a year. And he said, we're going to win the national championship. And people looked at him like, Clive, you've been here for a year, and our program is good, but it's not at that level. But we're going to be there. And I never forget him saying that. And then I think it was 6 years or 7 years later, we started playing for the national championship. Didn't quite get there for a couple of years in a row, but we started consistently playing for it. So when he got Tiffany to come, Milbert, on his team, who was being recruited by everybody in the nation, and she stayed here with him, that was a change, and that caused us to move forward. So
another person who recently retired, Jim Saulers, longtime women's basketball coach, took the team to 4 straight NCAA tournaments back in the 90s.
He did.
What do you remember about Jim?
Well, Jim, my first memory of Jim was he was a history teacher, and that's how I first met him, through the whole process of being charged with commencements, and Jim's needed to walk or something. I had to go get him some regalia. But then all of a sudden we find out that he's going to be the women's basketball coach. And I didn't realize you could do both. Jim did that for probably 6 or 7 years, which is a great commitment of time for him. He also had children at home. He also lived on a farm, and he's raising animals. And so Jim always been the one person I've looked at as time management. I learned from Jim how to manage your time outside of work, because Jim was able to do so many things.
Let's rewind it back even farther. Your student days here
Student days at UP.
What do you remember about those days? I know it's a long time ago, but what do you remember about being a student at the University of Portland?
UP for me was the love of my life, literally, because I fell in love with a lovely young lady named Suzanne O'Malley. So on my first trip onto campus, I was visiting from St. Martin's, because my first freshman year was at St. Martin's. I came down every weekend because St. Martin's social life was pretty nil, and 4 guys I went to high school with were going to school here. So we came down to visit them, and as visiting them, one time I'm sitting across from at the dining room table in the Commons, and there was this lovely girl who sat down, and people introduced her as Suzanne O'Malley, and next night was just before Christmas break, and next thing you know, she lives in Concord. I live in Albany, California, and next thing you know, I'm taking her out during Christmas break and decided I better go back to the University of Portland. Let's go back to St. Martin. So started at UP and went into education, and really, really enjoyed it. Lived in, I don't know how lengthy you want to get in this, but I can keep on going and going. But
Bill Reed, we still have plenty more to talk about.
Right.
Stick around for a few minutes?
Yeah, we're going to stick around as long as you want me.
All right. More Bill Reed coming up after the break.